Oh, there are a few people. Oh, one is you.
One's me.
One is Koichi. Okay, should we get going?
Sure.
All right, we're starting. So welcome to the CDN Interconnection Working Group. Do you want to get to the next slides? So some words about the chairs of this working group. So you know two chairs, François Lefaucheur, that's me, and Daryl Malas here. Daryl has changed responsibilities in his job, so he basically won't be able to continue attending IETF. So he stepped down as a co-chair of this working group, and Kevin Ma is stepping up. So we're doing the transition today, and basically from now on, there will be two co-chairs. That will be Kevin and myself. And we'll have to say goodbye to Daryl, and thanks very much for your service. I think Daryl wanted to do a long speech, so go ahead, Daryl. No.
Thanks to Kevin, too.
All right, so we have just one session, which is now. There's remote attendance via Meeteco. It's on, and there's a couple of people on there. So minute takers, Daryl volunteered to take notes, and Rob has. Thank you very much, Rob. Okay, so we're good with that. The blue sheets have started circulating. If you entered late and missed your go at the blue sheet, please fill it up. Make sure we have a room next time. All right, so as usual, we wanted to remind you about the note well slide. Please read it carefully. We won't read all of it today, but maybe we'll go again through the summary of it. If you participate in the IETF, that means you agree to the IETF process. You cannot just come on your own terms. And if you are aware that a contribution of yours is covered by patents or patent applications, you have to disclose that fact. Okay. So make yourself familiar with how you need to do that, but you need to do it. And also you have to understand that meetings might be recorded, broadcast and publicly archived, so you need to agree to that. If you don't, well, you cannot really participate. That's the gist of it, but again, you are encouraged to read the detail of that note. Okay, so let's talk about the agenda. As usual, we'll have a little introduction and a status update on all the documents. Then we'll talk about the media type document, then we'll talk about logging, then metadata, then the footprint and capabilities advertisement interface. And when we do that, we'll bring up the fact that there has been an IPR disclosure since our last meeting, and make a recommendation about how to go about that. Then we'll discuss request filing interface. We will also bring up another IPR disclosure there. We'll talk about the control interface. We'll talk about URI signing, and then we'll talk about HTTPS and delegation of encrypted traffic between CDNs. And then we'll close. So any comment, concern on the agenda, or are we good to go? Okay, we're good. So here's a quick update. So those are the RFCs that have been published. Hasn't changed, so I think we can quickly go through that. So one change since last time is, as agreed, we expedited the media type for CDNI, and it's actually worked really well, and it's in the RFC editor queue already. So, thanks in particular to Kevin for doing all the legwork on that and writing the document and, addressing everybody's comments, and thanks to Barry for making it flow smoothly through the process. That's worked really well. Great. So it's going to be an RFC very, very soon, and all the other documents depend on that. That's why it was so important to make it through quickly. All right. So other documents, the logging interface, you know that it's been under ISG review for a long time. I think we've made very significant progress on that, and we'll talk about that. But we had two big items on it: finalize ABNF description, and come up with a privacy-friendly solution that satisfies the ISG. And I think we've pretty much converged on both points. So we'll discuss that in detail. But it looks good, I think, for getting the document out the door. Metadata, well, we'll discuss, all the outstanding comments have been addressed, so we'll discuss whether the document's ready for working group last call right now, whether it needs another piece of work, but it's close to that. CDNI redirection, we said there's an IPR. Other than that, we'll see whether it's ready to move to ISG, depending on our decisions. Control interface, it has been submitted to ISG for publication, so it is in the hands of the ISG already. Right, Barry, you have an eye on that one, I believe. Footprint and capabilities advertisement interface, there's an IPR to discuss as well. But the semantics document was revved up and is pretty much ready, so we'll go through the details and decide whether that's ready for working group last call. URI signing. So a key decision we made at the last meeting is to get out of the working group document the material that relates to handling of adaptive bitrate streaming because of the IPR disclosure that affects that part of the document. So we now have two documents. We have the working group document that covers URI signing for non-segmented content, if I can say it that way. And Ray has issued a version of a separate document, which is an individual's documents for now, which still discusses the handling of segmented content and is under the scope of the IPR. Sorry, can you just go back? So for the working group document, the one for non-segmented content, there are still a few more changes coming that will be discussed. And we should discuss whether, after these changes, we feel the document's ready to go to working group last call. Handling of HTTPS delegation. Well, we had two separate documents and in the Prague IETF meeting, and as recommended then, the two documents have been converged into a single document that will be presented today. It's on the agenda. Okay, so I think we can shoot ahead. So Kevin, can you give us a quick update on the media type document?
Sure. Is this on? Can you guys hear me? Doesn't sound like it's on, but I'm going to go with it.
Doesn't sound because the light's on. It's on.
Is it? Can you guys hear me? Is that better? All right. Next slide, please. So last meeting, we did come to a conclusion on what we wanted to do with all the media types. Thanks to everybody who provided input before we left here, before we left Prague. I did write the draft and we put out 6 new revisions. Thanks everyone for the comments. Thank you, Barry, for helping out. We made through ISG review, and it's just sitting in the editor queue, and hopefully it'll be done soon. Basically, we decided to register a single media type application CDNI. We created a new registry called payload type to describe more specifically what the payload of that particular message was. And there's an example that we're using in metadata. That's about it, unless there are any questions. We have gone back and we've revved a number of the documents. Next slide, please. We've revved a bunch of the documents, metadata, routing, logging, and FCI to use the new media type. Those have been published for this IETF. There are a couple of ionic consideration things that need to be changed that I was reading back through, but those are just minor updates. Other than that, I think we're done with this one.
Thank you. So I think I'm next. All right, so I'm presenting on an update on the logging document, and there's been 2 versions posted since the last meeting. I posted one last night, I think, or yesterday. The bulk of the changes are between 19 and 20. There were 2 main topics. One is there were still some open ABNF fixes that were required. So Union took care of that, and good news is I spent a bit of time with Pete just before that meeting. He reviewed everything, and he said it's all cool. So Barry, you currently hold a discuss on behalf of Pete with respect to ABNF. You know, he's made it very clear he's cool with it, but you know, please check with him, and then you may want to remove out that discuss. Okay, we can move down. The second change related to privacy. Okay, so I have a few slides about that because that was a more engaged topic. Remember in Prague, we decided to create a design team comprising a few of the active participants in the CDNI working group, as well as a couple of people with a stronger privacy expertise, right? And that design team actually met and worked and came up with both an analysis of the privacy concerns, because that was a question that had been identified, you know, what exactly are we trying to protect against, as well as a solution to address the identified privacy concerns. So I'll try to summarize both the concerns and the solution. Basically, the first thing we did is to try to clarify what was not a concern, right? Because it was not obvious. So is it a concern that the DCDN holds detailed information about end users? It's not a privacy concern because the DCDN has this information. In fact, it's responsible for generating the logging information in the first place. So, you know, we're not concerned about the fact that the DCDN has access to that information. Okay. Is it a concern that a privacy concern that the upstream CDN is given access to all this detailed information, right? And we concluded, no, it's not a concern in itself, right? Because the upstream CDN is already aware of a lot of information about a delivery. Not all, not 100%, but obviously because the upstream CDN handles the initial request before redirecting to the downstream CDN, it sees a lot of information. It sees the IP address of the end user, it sees the URI, it sees the cookies, it sees everything in the request, at least in HTTP redirection. Okay, so it's not a concern that the upstream CDN is given detailed logging information about the delivery. Then we said, well, is it a problem to transport this detailed information over some sort of open interface, right? And no, it's not a concern because, like many other things that are carried, you can apply the usual IETF protection mechanisms such as TLS, and nobody's saying it's absolutely perfect, but it's considered good enough for many things, and it's good enough for transporting that sensitive information. So what's the concern? Well, the concern is that when you create CDNI logging file, you inevitably sort of accumulate together lots of detailed information. It's sort of in one place, or at least a logical place, which is the CDNI logging file. And basically, you put together information which now is becoming a very attractive privacy attack target. Okay, and the concern is that when it becomes attractive enough, then there's a risk of data exfiltration. So even if you cannot break the protocol when it's transmitted, there's a risk that within a company, within an upstream CDN entity or a downstream CDN entity, someone gets corrupted or some system gets corrupted, and then the file is extracted and shared. So that's what we're on about in terms of privacy protection. It's to protect that file so that, if it gets somehow exfiltrated, then you're not exposing too sensitive information or no sensitive information, ideally. All right, so that's the analysis summarized here about what we want to protect against. Now, how do we do that? Well, we basically replaced the CIP and CPORT fields as well as the C anonymization field that was there, by a single field, which is the C group ID, right? And that field is meant to be an opaque identifier of basically an aggregate set of clients. And it could be an arbitrary aggregate set of clients, right? It's an arbitrary set that typically the upstream CDN and downstream CDN would agree upon the mapping between, clients and, for example, IP addresses for client and the aggregate. Okay, an example would be something based on a geolocation, right? So, we've got an example here where all the clients that are part of, this area code, right? They would have the same C group ID showing up into their log records. Okay, doesn't have to be that. Just an example. And we basically say that upstream CDN and DCDN choose and agree on that mapping freely. It's agreed out of band. Now, we say that it should be chosen such that each aggregate contains more than one client, right? Because then you're really protecting, even if someone accesses the file, they cannot track anything back to one client. So that's how, the CDNR logging file is expected to be used in the common case. We left a sort of fallback mode, if you want to go to the next slide, for some special situations, right? There are a number of situations, a number of use cases where the upstream CDN needs to be able to identify back what was the particular client for a particular log record, okay? A couple of example applications are when you want to do extremely detailed analytics, or when there's situation where maybe a service provider has some sort of performance-based commitment, and if he didn't deliver to a particular user, there's a penalty. So then he needs to be able to prove that he either delivered with quality or without, okay? And that has to be, that can only be done if you can track back to an individual user. So for those applications, we allow a solution where, the mapping would map to a single client, right? So one IP address would be mapped to a single client ID, and the mapping could be reversible. So, basically it's some sort of encryption of the IP address effectively. And so it doesn't appear in the clear in the CDNI logging file, but the upstream CDN, because they has agreed on the mapping algorithm and the keys with the other CDN, he can regenerate the IP address, right? So that's an escape mechanism, if you will, for special situations, which, it's way less privacy protection, or way less efficient at protecting privacy, but it's still as efficient as you can get, considering the requirement to reconstruct the IP client identification, right? And for that situation, there's a bunch of mechanisms that are added onto that so that we offer protection against long-term attacks, right? And we made the risk about still it being breakable clear. And we also offered an alternative approach, which is privacy friendly, totally for that use case, but doesn't work in all situations. It just depends on how the service provider or operator is working. So I think we talked a lot about that, and I think we've come up with a fairly comprehensive approach to that. So that's the gist of it, and it's in the document that you have. And I think, yeah, you've had that in version 20 for a while. We had some feedback from Stephen Farrell on that, and I believe he said he's comfortable with it now, and I expect he will clear his discuss shortly, right? So what else? Then, yeah, I mentioned I issued a 21 version. That was to do basically editorial things, all of Kevin's comments that were discussed on the list, and also a private comment that Kevin made about, fine-tuning the IANA wording to be completely in line, perfectly in line with the media type document. So that's already done. So what do we have to do? Well, work with Stephen Farrell. Actually, we've already done that, so hopefully the discuss will clear. We do have to adjust the text that relates to the choice of algorithm. Right now, when we describe all the privacy thing, the wording is not consistent in some places between what you may do, what you should do, what you must do, what you should implement, what you must implement. So we think we have an agreement on what we want to do. I discussed that on the list. For memory, the proposal is that we specify one algorithm which is mandatory to implement, so that any implementation would support that, so that if you get one implementation in an upstream CDN and one implementation in a downstream CDN, they at least have one algorithm in common. But it's not mandatory to use. So implementation may support something else, and if both ends support something else, then the CDNs can agree to use that something else, right? So if you've got a concern with that, make sure you express that on the list quickly, because we'll tweak the text to reflect that. And then there's a comment that Kevin made recently, and we need to discuss more and then put the discussion on the list, but it has to do with how to deal with extensions. The CDNI logging document allows for extensions, in fact, in two ways. One is via a version number in the CDNI logging file, and one is via specifying new record types, right? But there's no recommendation as to when you use one, when you use the other, right? So, that's already come up when you do URI signing. The URI signing document defines new logging field specifically for URI signing. Well, how do you deal with that? I mean, is it a new record type or what, right? So we need to think a bit more about that and come up with a solution. But we'll try to work on these two topics shortly after this meeting, and then the document will be ready. But Barry, just practically, I wouldn't ever expect to have to say that, but now that we've cleared the two discussors, make sure the document doesn't go through as version 21, because we need a version 22. Yes. Okay. So that's all I had for the logging. Any question, comment?
Kent Leung. So maybe this is a good time to ask this question, right? After you just described the kind of rationale for the privacy support. In URI signing, we basically have a similar issue in terms of exporting, I guess, client IP address, that can identify a particular user. I know that we're talking private, but it's good to, you may not be able to show up later afternoon, but to get the recommendation, right, basically. So we came out with this solution here. Is it, I guess, a general solution that you would recommend for any CDNI related, such as URI signing feature to use as well, as far as protecting the client IP?
So the notion of, here we said, in the special case where you need to have IP address that are reversible, reconstructible, whatever's the right word, which I think you do need for the URI signing case, then it should be the same approach, right? Okay. In particular, if we specify a mandatory to implement algorithm for the mapping of IP address to encrypted thing, you would want to use recommend the same mandatory to implement algorithm, I would think.
Okay.
Kevin?
Kevin Ma. Yeah, I agree that we need to encrypt the IP addresses, I think, in the URI signing. It's going to be a little bit different because we had the timeout mechanism, the 24 hours for logging. But in the case of URI signing, we could just salt them differently for every single token. So it'd be slightly different, but it might be even better. But I think it should be good enough, and we probably should do it.
Okay, that's good. Good to know. Thanks.
Yeah, so it's the refresh of the seeds or keys, that would be different. All right.
Okay, I'll talk about metadata, the metadata draft. So we had 2 new revisions since Prague. Ben couldn't be here this IETF, but I wanted to thank Ben first for doing revision 11, which addressed most of the editorial comments. We had some outstanding comments from the apps directorate review and just a bunch of basic cleanup on the document and on the JSON. In version 12, we updated some more of the examples, cleaned those up. Matt and I gave it another once over. We switched all of the media types to using p-type with our single media type to bring it in line with the media type draft. We did some updates on the references and cleaned up a bunch of nits and grammar issues. 2 things that we did do, which I have on the next slide, is we removed the SID property from the grouping metadata, and we removed the credential auth type. And I haven't sent an email to the list, but I will do that after this meeting. But I just wanted to, put this up there and see if everybody in the room is in agreement here. So with SID, in the grouping metadata, there were 2 fields. One was CCID, which is a content identifier, so that the downstream knows that particular pieces of particular assets are related to the same piece of content. Specifically for like HTTP adaptive streaming, if you have a number of segments, you want them all to be associated with the same CCID. So that one was pretty straightforward. It's specified by the UCDN. The DCDN gets it and it can look at it and say, oh, I know these assets are in the same collection. With SID, this is for the subscriber identifier or the session identifier. So the DCDN actually generates this value and puts it into the logging file. It's not like it's a value that's passed from the UCDN down to the DCDN. And so having a method of having a value in there for it didn't really make sense except as an enablement value, a true-false Boolean. And we were talking about it, and it didn't seem to make sense to have a true-false Boolean. You could do that a couple of other ways. And we had talked offline with the logging authors, and we didn't come up with a good reason to keep it, so we removed it because it seemed superfluous. If anybody has any thoughts on that or objections to it, please let us know. Okay. The other one was credential auth. So we have an auth type object in there, but we didn't define any auth types really. There's a registry for it. So originally we had come up with credential auth, which was basic username and password. Now username and password is not useful for delivery authorization. Delivery authorization really was always going to be URI signing. We just kind of wanted to fill something in the registry as an example. But since it doesn't make sense for delivery, since we're not going to pass every username and password of every person who's going to view the content, it didn't make sense. Now you could use it for acquisition auth. So when the DCDN acquires the content from the upstream CDN, it could be password protected. It's not usually password protected, and you can put the username and password in the URL anyway, so we didn't see that there was really a need to have it. It was just cluttering up the document, so we removed it. But if anyone sees a good reason or a strong need for us to put it back in and keep it, please let us know. Otherwise, we're going to go forward with removing those 2 things. Nobody. Next slide, please. So the next steps, I did another read through and I found a couple of typos, so I'm going to fix those. We still had a couple of questions on the references, normative versus informative, but that should be fairly easy. And then we were reading through the security considerations and we need to update it. We don't have a very strong privacy section stating that there aren't really privacy issues here, so we wanted to update that. But other than that, we believe we've addressed all the comments that we've gotten thus far, and we think we're ready to go to last call unless anybody thinks otherwise. Kent thinks otherwise.
No, definitely not. I'm all for going forward. So Kent, question, I just want to clarify earlier the comment that I guess the delivery auth could be no as well, or is it required?
Yes, no,
Okay.
it's not required.
Okay,
yes.
that's the one.
But we just figured we have a registry, we wanted to fill it with an example, but yeah. If
Yeah,
not,
so on that question, I mean, so the document's been around for a while, it's been
Yes.
reviewed for a while.
yes,
It had quite a few changes in the later revision.
yes,
So my suggestion would be that, you know, you do an update, maybe we do a chair review,
okay,
right? One more time. And, you know, if it needs updates, you will have another revision. If not, then I think after that, it will be ready to go to working groups last call. That would be my proposal. So
okay. And we can get that done before Buenos Aires?
we should do it. Yes.
Okay.
I mean, there's no reason to wait for Buenos Aires now.
Okay.
Or unless there's very significant comment in the review, but I don't think so. So is everybody comfortable, or does anybody have a problem with this approach where, you know, there's a new rev of metadata that does the change that you see on that slide, then we'll do, the two chairs will do a review, sort of back-to-back review. And once these comments, if any, are addressed, we'll go to working group last call. Okay, so I think that's the plan of record then.
Okay. Then I'll talk about FCI. So the footprint and capabilities semantics document. We've been working on this one for a long time as well. The main blocker for a while has been what are we going to do with registries, and in Prague we fixed all that by deciding on the media type. And so we went through and did a rev of the document. I updated the examples to use media type and registered a new media type. Actually, a few new media types. There are 3 of them listed there. And then went through and did a full read-through, updated a lot of the grammar and a bunch of nits and typos, fixed all the references, normative versus informative, and that's about it. I think you could go next slide, please. Oh, but we do have the IPR disclosure. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, yes. So I brought that up on the list already, right? This is not news, okay? We had an IPR disclosure that relates to the footprint capability semantics document. It was brought to your attention, and we asked you to think about it. Here is an excerpt from the disclosure, and in particular, the licensing terms. And, you know, trying to not take a position, I think the summary is that, you know, these are the typical purely defensive licensing term. So please read it for yourself, but it sort of says, you know, if you implement the standard, there won't be any royalty sought. However, if you implement the standard and attack the company who has the IPR, you know, they will use the IPR to defend themselves, okay, which is a very common licensing terms for IETF and IPRs, which relate to documents. So, you know, we need to decide whether this IPR changes anything for that document or whether we want to change anything on the course of the document or not. Another thing to keep in mind is that this document is, actually, do you want to move, I want to move to the next slide. Another thing to keep in mind is that, you know, this document is going for informational track. This is just a semantics document, okay? So perhaps we could, you know, I don't know if people want to offer some opinions, but I think the key decision is, you know, can we agree that the licensing terms here are acceptable since they're purely defensive, and, you know, can we agree that we just continue with our current plan, or do people feel that we, you know, does the working group feel that we should change our group because our plan because this is somehow not acceptable? So, you know, I don't know. Let me relay. Ray has offered an opinion, which is that, I mean, to him, you know, the licensing terms are acceptable, and he thinks we should just go ahead. You know, as an individual, I will offer my position, which is the same. I mean, to me, you know, this is, I think it's a late to put an IPR disclosure, if I may say, but given that it is there, to me, the licensing terms are acceptable, and I think, you know, we shouldn't just change our course of action. Anybody else wants to express an opinion?
As an individual, I agree. We should just continue. I don't think it really affects us.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay, so, you know, let's say let me ask the question, does anybody object to us sticking with our plan and not changing our course? Nope, so I think we're good.
Okay. Okay, so next slide. We have to remove CIP anonymizing because it was removed from the logging interface and it no longer makes any sense. We had a question about authorship, but I think we're just going to leave it. We have 5 authors. As long as nobody cares, then we're good. We do need to update the security considerations. We're rereading through that as well, just to make a stronger statement about the fact that there aren't any security considerations with this particular draft. But mostly I think the draft is ready. There hasn't been any update to the 2 capabilities drafts, my draft and Jan's draft. We were waiting on finishing the semantics draft. So hopefully we can get back to that for Buenos Aires. But other than that, I think those 2 edits and then we're ready to go unless anyone has any other thoughts.
Right, so as a chair, I agree the document, you know, with these changes will be ready to go to working group last call. Does anybody have a comment or concerns on that? Okay, so let's have that as a plan. So this is very much a two-man show, but so I'm going to present here. This is not my presentation, but I'll present it on behalf of Ben and Ray because none of them are attending. So just pretend I'm Ben, say. There's been 2 versions since Prague.
Your accent's wrong.
Yeah. Pretend I'm Ray. Obviously, one change was to align to the CDNI media type RFC or almost RFC, and there was basically work done to address the comment that John put forward at the last IETF meeting in Prague. So there was an attempt to address that, and turned out that it was not really addressed properly. So there has been discussion on the list about that. Actually, I think the next slide talks about that. Yes. So I think now, after the discussion, authors and John have converged on understanding each other, which is a good start. And Ben offered some. Yes, Ben offered some text on the mailing list. Basically, the point made is that with DNSSEC, you can now distinguish between redirection that are valid redirection versus what could be a malicious redirection. Okay, so again, Ben offered some text on the mailing list and was asking for feedback. As an individual myself, I suggested some editorial enhancements so that, in my opinion, it can read better. If anybody else has comment, please do that. In particular, John, maybe, I don't know if you've looked at the text, but if you could have okay. If you want to comment on that, I think it's a good time now. We can register that and move on afterwards.
So I want to be done with this. Okay, I made a really offhand remark about this, and I didn't want this to cause this like cascading set of "Bring Me a Rock" style discussions about it. I'm sure it's the case that if we use DNSSEC, that the DNS part of this would work. What I was really asking, though, again, was not for a solution, but for the problem to be described. And I mean, I can't object to the text that is being proposed now, I guess, because it's not going to help. But I don't know.
So I think you're saying you feel the problem is could be articulated better. Is that what you're saying? And I mean, at least when I read that, I understand the problem. So maybe it doesn't do it the way you'd like, but it does the job, doesn't it?
So the existing base of CDN solutions that use the DNS today have a different security situation than the ones that use HTTPS for redirection today. That is what I want the text to say. If the text said that sentence, which I've tried to articulate on the mailing list many times, that would be fine. Saying that in some science fiction future there might be DNSSEC and that it'll work. I'd love to see that world. By the way, that'd be a fantastic world, and it would indeed fix this problem. But I'm not asking for this document to propose a solution that is in that science fiction realm. I was asking for this to note that there is a difference between the use of these two things today. And if it did that, then I would shut up. And I am shutting up. This is literally the last time I'm ever going to say anything about this. I'm only in this room to say this. So, but I would say go forward over my objections. And adding this text, I think, will not change anything any implementer would do. But if other people in this room think adding the text that has been proposed would help, feel free to add it. It's not wrong, but it doesn't have anything to do with what I'm really talking about.
Kevin Ma, I'm happy with this text and the text that John just proposed at the mic. If we want to transcribe it and add it, we can talk to Ray about that. And I don't think that's the problem.
Yeah, we'll say. Yep. I've basically asked for that text to be added like 15 times now. And that one sentence is not hard to add. So I mean, I assume there's actually some reason why people don't want to distinguish between the security properties of these two solutions. We have a document, we're saying it's a standard, we're saying there are two ways to do something. We want them both to be a standard, and we're not distinguishing between the security properties of these two solutions. If I cared, I would be up here arguing things like, well, maybe there should be a standard that says we should do the one that is secure and not the other one, right? But I don't care, so I'm not doing that. And so you guys do what you want.
so how about, John? I mean, you've exchanged a lot of messages. I can't believe, the simple sentence you mentioned is not converged upon. So why wouldn't you suggest, I think you're saying that's not the answer to what you want, but you don't disagree with it. So I think we can close on that.
This is fine text, yeah.
Okay, so we can add that.
Wrong with that.
Now, why don't you put on the list the sentence you suggested? That's fair. Okay, and I think that will move things forward. Thank you. Well, here's the text. We all know it now. So I think there's nothing after that, right? Yeah. Oh, well, apart from the IPR. Okay. So same story about the IPR from the same company, exactly same licensing term. So we need to make the same, we need to decide whether we need to change course of action also for CDNI redirection. As an individual, I have the same position. Other people have a position on that?
This is Kevin. As an individual, I have the same position as well.
Okay. Does anybody, Barry?
This is Barry. I just wanted to say that the IESG often asks about whether these things were discussed. Please make sure that the minutes reflect that they were discussed and there were no objections, so that if the IESG asks, you have the answer ready.
Yep. Yeah. All right, so I understand no one objects to us continuing with our course of action, right? If you do object, say so now. Okay, so next step, well, finalize that text, and that will be very quick because John's going to send us a sentence and everyone will agree and we'll be good to go. So I think once we have that, the claim is that the document would then be ready to go to IESG. So then I'll talk as a chair about that. Does anyone have any comment on whether the document is ready to go to IESG review? No? Okay. I mean, as a chair, I feel it will be ready once that DNS text is ready. So plan would be when we get the new rev, we'll just press the button and request IESG review. Any comment on that? Okay. All right. Rob, that will be your turn. Thanks for attending that meeting and not asking us to present on your behalf. Yeah, blue sheets. I think some of you entered the room late. Please grab the blue sheets and fill them up if you haven't.
So not particularly much to say on this one, just one slide. Media types aligned with Kevin's draft and some editorial tidy-ups addressing comments from Francois. And that's about it. Francois submitted it to ISG already.
Right. Okay.
That's it, I think.
Thank you. That's a quick presentation.
So I'll give an update on URI signing. So just basically what we did in the last version, as Francois said, we just reset it. We took out the adaptive bit streaming in version 5. And thanks to Lee and Phil, you can stand up and take a bow. But thanks a lot that we got a review on the working group. So there was a bunch of questions and comments made. And basically what we wanted to do was kind of clarify them. So we had a little meeting. And, you know, of course, just want to mention that there were some caveats that came with it, and so people are aware. And what we're trying to do is reflect some of the comments in the next version. Oh, sorry. You know what? Sorry. Version? Yeah. I'm out. I gave the latest. So this was the slide deck before we met. So I had some markers. Yep, looks good. Yep. Can you go back? Yeah, this one here. Yep. Okay, so yeah, so we'll go through. So here's some of the highlights for what we discussed. First, there's a bunch of editorial nits and clarifications that we'll make. So I'll get into some of the key, I would say, reasonable comments that came through. Some of these are, I would say, makes the URI signing better than what it is currently. So we'll go through some of that and get people's feedback. The first one is the support URI path selection, right? So the idea is that current model is that we do the full URI sign, right? So no changes can be made to that URI sign URI part. The idea here now is that it's not quite doing what HAS had done in terms of trying to select portions, but the concept is similar in terms of being able to select portions of that URI and saying that that part is protected, right? So give that flexibility to be able to do that. So the idea here is that, of course, we don't want to reintroduce HAS and all this stuff again, right? The idea is that can we come up with a base method that we can all agree upon, and get a consensus and use that as a starting point. We feel that we could do that because we do some wild carding, and some basic concepts. So anyways, we don't have to discuss it now because we have set up a 3 p.m. meeting later today for people who are interested. We can have a discussion on that. The objective is to come up, with a consensus on the base one. If we do and feel it's simple enough, it's not, I guess, too controversial, then we'll proceed forward and add that capability to the URI signing draft. The second one is allowing flexible prefix length for client IP. Again, this kind of makes the gives a lot more flexibility. Today is a fixed size in terms of it's always /32 for IPv4. It's a host IP address, basically, right, that we're kind of validating. So this idea here is, again, it's optional. You can select what the prefix is, and then actually be able to authorize based on that. So again, it sounds like a good flexible scheme to adapt as well. So again, that sounds good for us. And actually, we was mentioned about IPv6, right, where we really haven't talked so much about IPv6 up to this point, but pretty much /64 is a very common prefix for us, IPv6. So it kind of ties into why we should probably allow this mechanism. And in some ways, it's related to the next bullet, which is that part of the things that we have been talking about, kind of access authorization a lot in the draft, as far as using the scheme as a way. The other things to want to mention is that we want to say that it's a way of doing DDoS protection, right? So having basically the granularity of the subnets allows you to kind of, again, do different things with that for using URI signing. Okay. A few more. One is, okay. Next one's about the current models that we are fixated with basically enforcing that the protected part of the URI signing cannot be changed, right? Of course, you can add other new attributes anywhere, but that's the protected part is the opaque. Now the package part cannot be changed. Sorry. Let me step back. Actually, the idea today is that after you have assigned URL, actually you can add new attributes at the end or wherever, right? Because we already know which part's protected. So what we want to do here in that one is making sure that we actually don't want the signed URL to change at all, right? I mean, so that there's a kind of additional option to indicate that when you get the signed URL, that it is exactly the way it was original, right? So I mean, that's the kind of new check that's in place. Again, all these are new options, right? To say that this is what we want to do in the signed URI. The next one is again, the current models that for signed URI is that the scheme part of the URI, right, is actually chopped off, you can say, right? So it actually, and it allows some certain flexibility, right? You can do different type of, I guess, schema, and change that, and still, not have to recalculate the whole digital sign signature. Actually, what this is saying that actually it will be useful too to completely protect the entire part, including the scheme, right? So part of the URI, and again, it seems like a good idea in some cases too, right? So again, this is an option that should be available within URI signing. So, and one topic that was talked about earlier about, especially on the logging side, right, is the current model, what's written in draft today as far as kind of privacy protection issue, addressing that was to, I would say, chop off the entire URI signing package, right, before we send it through the CNI logging. But I think this needs some more discussion, right? So one option, that's why I brought it up earlier, is that, the CDNI logging interface went through a long iteration of addressing this particular issue, and they come to a good conclusion at this point, right? And maybe it's something that we can use as a reference to to try to address our issue as well, since we also, and again, going to privacy in terms of if you would go with a client IP prefix base, then actually that might work out in the sense that you don't show a particular client IP address, right? So that actually addressed one part. But the part where you actually do have a specific client IP address in the CIP attribute, right? Then that is exposed and can be used to identify a particular user. In that case, then when we're sending out to logging, we want to make sure we can have some kind of anonymity or mechanism as what we have as well. So anyways, this is also another topic that we'll try to address in the 3 p.m. meeting for people who are interested. I think the last one here is the idea is that I kind of missed it, I guess. It would be nice to have a nonce, basic concept, right? To kind of add some more entropy, right? Because, a lot of the other stuff, attributes like client IP, expiration time, all that stuff are optional. So if you're, fetching the same content over and over again, you're actually not changing much of the signature and stuff. So actually having a nonce would kind of enhance the kind of security property of that. I think those were, go next slide. Okay, so those were basically, I would say, capture the gist of our discussions on the mailing list as well as face-to-face. The next steps, I guess, we have is kind of a pre-security review. Brian Weiss was anointed the lucky guy to look at this. So I don't think he's had time to do that. So, but I guess when he does, he'll send it to the mailing list. So we'll need to address whatever comes up from there. And it's good to get that review before I actually go through IESG and internal security.
Is he going to review the current version or the version after the edits from this afternoon's meeting?
That's a good question. Initially, it was what we have, but I think at this point it's probably better because it seems like there's enough touch points, right? That especially some of them are all over the map. So yeah. I would say we probably should tell them to hold off until we do one more revision after we get a more working group consensus.
Right. We should probably send him an email and let him know.
Okay. Good idea. We can take a note on that. And of course, the next one is, we still have some outstanding issues at this point based on the review. And, I think hopefully we want to be able to resolve all of them, ideally, right, by the end of today, and start basically updating the next version of the draft. And then, of course, we'll see, right? And basically, that's the thing. Then we're ideally done with the working group review, formal review, and whatever goes next, right? That's all I had. I don't know if any further comments, questions.
The changes that are going in, do you feel that they're fairly significant that we should do another review, or are we happy with making these edits and then trying to do a last call?
Are you volunteering? I don't think they're major changes, but they can be across the sections. I think that's one thing. There's some readability things that we've done too, right? But I think the key things are there. I think if people agree to what they are, I think it might be good to have somebody do a quick review of the delta if possible, right? To just make sure that we capture everything we said we would do, right? But I don't, that's my thought.
I agree, Ken. We're talking about what to do in order to go to working group last call, which is meant to be a review, right? So okay. I don't think it's going to be 100% ready for working group last call.
Okay. Yep.
And I'm just writing the note to Brian Weiss right now to tell him to hold. So
okay.
Should I tell him the version number that
should be 6? Should be the next one. We'll hold off at this point, right? Because I know that Ray was holding off until we had this discussion to clear things up. So I think with this stuff, then we'll talk and we should get the next version with everything. Yeah.
Probably should have the working group have an opportunity to review the next version
before Brian. Okay. Then it might be 7 then, right? If there's delta, right? People want it.
Okay, we'll
just probably wait over. We let them know. Yeah. Actually, one thing, the MIME type, right? We need to update that too. Right.
Yeah, we need to update the ionic consideration section for the logging stuff as well.
Yeah, that's true. And the logging as well. Yep. So a few more things.
All right. Thanks, Kent.
Hi. So I'm Frederick Pugh. I will speak about the HTTPS delegation draft. Basically, I take over the job started by Union Prescu on this topic. So since the last version of the draft, we had a couple of changes to make. So the first one is to merge. We had merged the two drafts that related to the HTTPS delegation in CDNI. So the draft, our draft, so started by Uniona, and the draft started by Sergei Sovetski. So we try to merge the two drafts and to keep the most interesting parts, and to rephrase some of the paragraph. The next point was to clarify the HTTPS and DNS delegation issues and requirements. So we identified some security requirements regarding the HTTPS delegation. And the third part was to add a section on a third-party API for delegation, yet named keyless SSL. Next slide. So on this draft, we identified security requirements on HTTPS delegation. We identified 3 requirements. So the first one is to ensure the legitimacy of delegation. That means that a UCDN must designate willfully a DCDN to deliver the requested content, so as to ensure that the delegation is trusted. Second security requirement is to ensure that there's a seamless security redirection scheme. So that means that when we redirect a user agent from one CDN to another, we must see no warnings on user side. And the third one, that is maybe more transverse, is to guarantee the confidentiality of CDN's configuration and topology information. So that means that we need to hide somewhat the CDN hierarchy, for instance. Next slide. So in the draft, we rephrase the issues regarding the security aspects. So we try to see whether the requirement complies with each requirement were satisfied. So the first one is the legitimate delegations. So as far as HTTPS redirection is concerned, we can say that this is ensured because the UCDN sends back the DCDN URL to the user agent through a secure HTTPS connection. The second one is the seamless security scheme that we can say is not always ensured, because when the UCDN certificate is not valid for the DCDN domain, then the user agent may display a warning message. And the third one, the confidentiality, we can maybe say that the CDN hierarchy can be visible to the end user. So that should be valid for all HTTPS redirection methods, 3.0x directives, URL rewriting, and API scripted redirection. So as far as DNS redirection is concerned, yes.
Hi, John Peterson. So in HTTPS redirection, is there actually a practical use case in which you're doing the things you say down there that should be valid, and somehow that seamless security scheme is not ensured? What is the way this works, where you're doing everything's HTTPS, you're doing redirection with something like the 302, and yet there's some problem with the certificate that you're being offered by the DCDN? Is there any practical case in which it is possible for that to not be seamless in the sense that you mean?
You mean?
So, I mean, here's the way I would look at it. If we assume we're doing everything with HTTPS, and yes, this is very much related to my earlier comments about this, and I want to make sure that we're articulating what I think the problem of this is. And anybody, by the way, who does not think that this is a requirements document for the CDNI redirection thing we're talking about passing, does not understand what this document is about, I think. But like, so I mean, if you form an HTTPS connection to a server, right, and it sends you a 302, you will get back that 302 response, and it'll contain a new URL, which you're going to dereference. And when you contact that service, you're going to forge a new TLS connection to it, right? And the certificate that it is going to present you is going to be the one that you learned from the URL that you got from the initial service, right? That's how HTTPS redirection works. So I'm asking, is there any case in which there's actually a chance this cannot be seamless?
I think we agree on that.
So why does it say there that seamless security scheme is not always ensured in the middle bullet? I think for HTTPS redirection, it had better always be ensured. For DNS redirection, it is not, right? And that is what needs to actually be articulated somewhere in the work of this working group. And so, this slide, if this slide is only about HTTPS redirection, then I think that should say it is always ensured. Or am I crazy? I mean, I don't understand what the problem is here. What am I not understanding about the architecture of this protocol?
Hi, this is Juliana. I think what he's trying to say here on the security scheme not being ensured is the fact that you might have misalignment between the cert and the domain name that you're actually being redirected to. And it's not, so the security scheme here does not refer to the actual fact whether the HTTPS redirection is legitimate or not, or whether if it's done securely or not. It's when you're doing your second TLS connection, you might just get a cert error. If you're asking for domain A and you're being served by CDN, that presents your certificate for domain B.
Okay, so.
So that's like 1990s problem maybe, but you might have that sometime.
So let me get this straight. The actual problem here is that you think that when you get this 302 from domain A and you've now got a URL for domain B,
Yeah.
and this could happen too if you had the URL for domain B to start with, right? And you've never gone to domain A.
Exactly.
You can go to a host on the internet that supposedly has a certificate and it doesn't happen to have a proper certificate because it's expired or something. Is that what this document is about? That's
No,
maybe
the document is not about this, but this is what
why?
this sentence
Yeah.
here is about.
Okay, so literally all this sentence is trying to say is that it is possible that any domain you contact on the internet that you're trying to form a TLS connection to might not have its own certificate, or its certificate might not be valid.
Yes. So it's much simpler than
Frederic,
what
is
you
that
had
what
in
this
mind
is
probably.
trying to say?
Yes, somewhat.
Okay, so
Okay. I do not believe that is the CDNI working group's problem, personally.
Well, it's
I think
not,
the problem is what I think we've been trying to articulate in both the redirection discussion and in this one, but okay.
it's CDNI work in the measure in the extent to which it's also CDNI work to talk about DNSSEC and how DNS can be hijacked, and you can do DNS redirection in CDNI.
The CDNI work group is making choices about what it's going to have as standards for how you do redirection. And yes, the security properties of those choices are a valid subject for discussion. We're not designing either the DNS protocols that underlie that or TLS. We're just talking about the
I
properties
agree
here,
with
right?
you. I agree with the fact that there's a problem. I agree with the fact that it should be described somewhere. If I recall correctly, you were like volunteered into sending a sentence to the mailing list.
Let me read the sub-bullet under seamless security there. It says, when the UCDN certificate is not valid for the DCDN domain. What this is about is not what you were telling me that it is about. This is about this case where, again, because of DNS redirection or something, when you go to domain B, it does not have, domain A's cert. This is what this bullet is trying to say. Don't represent it as being something else. Okay? And if that's the problem, it is not a problem for HTTPS. And it should not be on a slide saying that this is a problem for HTTPS redirection. It is a problem for DNS redirection.
Okay. I see what you mean. I think, yeah, okay. I think there are two problems actually. And people are talking about both of them and making a confusion here, but okay, if you want to put that in the DNS part, let's put that in the DNS part. But I think let's just let him go through the DNS slide and then talk about it.
Okay, but for this slide, it should be done. It should say that it works, right? Like, why are people trying to sweep under the rug? This works for one of these options and not the other. There's not a problem with this option.
Okay, so maybe we can move on to the next slide.
But before you do, can I just drop my little concern here? I'm sorry, I didn't hear anyone else say their names. I think my name is John. My name is Bill Manning, and I'm a little bit interested in things that I have seen in the wild where we have certificate authorities which are compromised and will issue certificates in, I was going to say in error, or that point at the wrong things at the wrong place. And if you happen to find that CA show up first, your HTTPS redirection will work and you will still end up in the wrong place, but with a valid cert. Not that this group is going to take care of that.
We're not.
Okay, thank you.
But it's not, the assured bothers me, because that's, you can't really be assured because you can't really trust your CA.
Oh, yeah.
Now move on to the next slide.
Yeah, but please do. Of course, Mr. Manning is correct about this. And yes, unfortunately, we're not going to fix the fundamental problems with CAs and TLS and DANE, things like that here. But assured, I know, is not the right word for this. Yes.
Okay, so for the DNS redirection, we can say that the legitimate delegation is not ensured because, well, it's related to the hard problem. So basically, it's a problem that is wider than the HTTPS delegation scope. But it's to say that we cannot guarantee that UCDN can designate the DCDN willfully, because a possible attack is that a malicious DNS resolver could return DNS responses to steer the user agent to another server. As far as the security scheme is concerned, we can say that is not ensured because the user agent might expect the UCDN certificate but receive a DCDN certificate instead. So a warning message will be issued. And for the confidentiality, we can say that the CDN hierarchy might not be visible to the end user due to the DNS protocol that is de facto created. So we can say also that the secure DNS-based delegation should always be based on the use of DNSSEC, but we cannot guarantee it. Next slide, please. Another adding on the draft was the third-party API for delegation, which GM is to guarantee a seamless security scheme and to a trusted delegation. So basically, the idea is to introduce a private key server in the TLS and check. So the private keys remain under the authority of the DCDN, of the UCDN, sorry, while content can be delivered by the DCDN. So this splits the setup of the secure connection between the user agent and the surrogate that will deliver the content. This architecture is already deployed by some CDN vendors under the name of Keyless SSL. So how it works? So when we try to establish, when the user agent, sorry, try to establish the TLS connection, the DCDN will forward the challenge to the key server, which is under the control of the UCDN. And upon the UCDN request, the DCDN surrogate will be able to establish a secure connection with the user agent without triggering any warnings, hopefully. Next slide, please. So for the next steps, so one of the first action point would be to maybe to more clearly describe the third-party API use case, to describe very specific use case, and detail some token-based solution. So based on URI signing, for instance, and maybe add a section on XMPP push. Okay. Any question on other question or remarks?
Kevin Ma, I think we probably also need to more clearly describe what it is we think the HTTP redirection problem is. I had a question. Is it when both CDNs are hidden behind the same domain, perhaps the content provider's domain? Is that where the problem is? If I'm content provider, do you believe that would be a problem if I'm content provider A and I map and I CNAME, you know, myself to CDNA and CDNB and just call them cdna.example.com and cdnb.example.com? They both have the same domain if the cert is for that domain, but
so there's a great group that's called Dbound, I think these days, is trying to solve that zone cut problem that is one of the known hard problems of how you articulate certificate scopes and things like that. So there are really, really hard edges that surround that particular question. I don't think that we inherit those problems anytime we're going to use TLS and CAs, right, unfortunately. But again, I think there is a very particular problem for CNAMing out of your domain to some other domain. We're going to get a very surprising certificate in these DNS cases that simply is not surprised in the HTTP cases, because you have a direct assurance from the UCDN that you're supposed to be contacting the DCN, right?
Right. There's the first half of that, which is, you know, do I know that I'm supposed to be going there? But the second half was, did I get a bad cert from them and cause the, I don't know, an error?
Yeah, and I mean, obviously you got to make sure your cert design is, your certificate architecture for this is reasonable, right? And some of those subdomain cases, like I said, because of these questions about exactly how you infer zone cuts, and people do like wildcard CAs and like all kinds of things to try to, this exists in the wild, Bill.
No, no one does that.
Yeah. So no, I mean, seriously. So I mean, these are known problems, and it might be worth articulating some of those problems if we're really trying to speak to things like how and why keyless SSL works and whether that's really a good solution. And it has its own whole security analysis we could be doing, right? About keyless SSL and about POSH, all these things. So
I guess again, as an individual, I'm wondering what it is, how those things, other than as a problem statement, apply to CDNI, and what is the, you know, is it proposed that there's a solution that CDNI is going to solve any of these problems?
So since a lot of this stuff seems to hinge on DNS and DNS manipulation, and there's been tangential discussion about DNSSEC being a good thing, it would be nice to have a more full discussion about how DNSSEC actually can mitigate some of these particular sets of problems. In particular, there is some pretty reasonable work on doing TLS certificate distribution in a secure DNS. Second thing, perhaps more concrete, has to do with known trust anchors. If the CDN provider is expecting people to trust its DNS, its secure DNS hierarchy, you should probably insist upon people participating in that CDN to use the CDN provider's keys as the trust anchor, as opposed to having to walk outside the CDN and going up to ICANN to get better validation.
Yes, that it's all true that if we had DNSSEC as a reasonable use case, just because so much of this is DNS manipulation, that would make a lot of these kinds of problems go away. And I think having DANE modes that let you identify the particular cert that the UCDN wants to bless would be useful too. I mean, to your question, Kevin, and I think, Bill, we might be able to grab like some boilerplate to the effect, because that has been thought through so much by the people who are doing TLSA and things like that. I think we probably would just end up pointing to that more than really doing anything novel with it. I mean, I assumed that the purpose of this exercise when I first saw this draft was to, bless and canonize keyless SSL here, right, as the solution that people wanted to use for CDNs. And I think a little bit of reflection is warranted before we actually do that, which is one of the reasons why I want to have the problem statement be crisp enough before we decide what the solution is going to be for this. Nobody wants to talk about, the problem sufficiently, I think, for there to be any realistic, selection process for a solution. And the fact that we're going to pass this CDNI redirection draft before any of this discussion actually transpires means that it's going to be moot at the end of the day anyway, right? Because that's going to tell you how you're going to use HTTPS, in the standard for this. Well, we spin our gears in a requirements exercise that is, 2 years too late. Other than for just blessing keyless SSL, right? Which is what it is.
We're not blessing keyless SSL, John. At least not for the time being. Okay, so this is Juliana. My intent was, when I first started with this draft, was to point to the fact that there is a real life problem with delegating HTTPS traffic between CDNs. And my intent was at least to try and explain what the issue was and then delegate to some smarter people doing TLS APIs and DNS, probably giving them more work. So if you want to do something and like contribute and like help the planet, like help us make this better and describe the problem as you think it should be described, even if it's probably not going to go in the redirection draft, which maybe would be a better place. But well, let's make this one good then.
It's an academic exercise. As long as we're clear, this is an academic exercise, right? To talk about what we could have done if we had started doing CDNI redirection this way, then I'm willing to entertain that. And I have been. I've been talking about this, right? Like since you brought it up. I've been here trying to help. And I think that the main thing I can do to try to help is to say what the problem is and how it could possibly end up factoring into the way that the architecture of the protocols here is going to work. And we need to be realistic about what that looks like.
If we're being realistic, I think the first thing to keep in mind is the fact that we were doing this exclusively for HTTP when we first started. Although, well, in practice, we were doing this for HTTP, and we said we are going to look at HTTPS at a later stage, and we kind of like put that on the side of it, maybe. And now I'm bringing HTTPS on the table, and we're going to look back and see, well, what we defined, it's not very extensible to HTTPS and all that. So
let me run my recollection of this. So my recollection of this was that there was something like PerPass that came along. And we suddenly decided that, especially in mobile environments where this hadn't previously been true, there's going to be much, much more HTTPS in the world than there had been previously. And that consequently, we needed to re-examine the redirection interfaces in light of the fact that we expected the majority of the traffic going around to now be HTTPS. I think when people were first thinking about CDNI redirection, they were largely thinking about it in terms of HTTP and bare DNS is the way it was going to operate. But because of the strong push for especially opportunistic encryption, it was necessary to reevaluate this. But what we're not doing is actually reevaluating how our interfaces work. Instead, we're engaging in this academic exercise, which, again, if we're going to say that this isn't going to touch what is in CDNI redirection, then basically we're going to end up blessing a workaround for this, because the workarounds are the only things that are going to address it. And as far as workarounds go, it's going to be keyless SSL or one of these other things. But it's the security evaluation of those, which are being done out in the industry, not here in the IETF. And go talk to Ecker about what he thinks about keyless SSL or any of the people that are responsible for TLS's design, right? And I mean, you'll get an earful, I promise.
I'm not suicidal. I'm going to stop here.
Okay, so maybe deserves a more detailed discussion after.
Sorry, I'm sorry. That would be nice. Sorry. I I've been really, really mean, John Peterson, today. I know. I took this cold medicine that I found in Japan because I have a stuffy nose, and I blame the fact you can actually get Sudafed here for how uppity I am. I think it is good that we are having this discussion, right? Because the main thing I think we want is to make sure that implementers and service providers are aware of what the properties are of these solutions. And I think it is actually very important that we articulate this and that we keep pushing on this and looking at what the possible things are that we can do that may help. Certainly is the case, there is going to be a lot more HTTPS. We shouldn't like sweep this under the rug. Again, I just obviously am concerned about the fact that we are going to progress documents that we know have a problem. And I've been trying to convince those people to at least articulate that they have a problem in that document, right? That all this points to, because it's all right. There is a problem here. But I do want to make sure that flipping back 5 slides, because this is what has been pushed back against this constantly, is this notion that the same problem is there for HTTPS as there is for DNS. Neither of them are really assured, and that's just not true. This actually works for HTTPS, right? And it doesn't work for DNS redirection. That's where the problem is. And every time I see a slide that says, actually, we have the same problem in both these ways we can do redirection, I get angry and I get up to a microphone. So let's just be honest about this. And I think we'll be much closer to actually having a solution and having documents that are going to help implementers and service providers understand what they need to do as there's more HTTPS out there in the world.
Yes, well.
Yeah, hi, I'm Gihan. Yeah, I'm new here, so I'm slightly confused, but I guess just it's a basic question. As far as this whole thing is concerned, it's basically for downstream CDNs, which would be like internet service providers, to run CDNs for their customers. Is that the basic idea?
The idea is to delegate use CDN to delegate.
Right, but the objective would be for, say, a service provider, an ISP, to run a CDN for their customers and delegate and work with upstream CDNs?
Not strictly ISPs, but CSPs, content service providers.
Oh, okay, whatever. Yeah, so I'm just trying to figure out, and I believe one of the major reasons for needing this as opposed to running, some kind of proxy service is HTTPS, because what we found is that we used to run proxies and they work fine with HTTP, but they don't work with HTTPS. So I just want to say, well, I think I was hoping that you would have really solid solution for HTTPS. So I think that's the direction we should go for if we can.
Yes, we're all hoping we'd have a good solution for HTTPS. So we discussed that and we agreed it was a good thing to look at and try to solve, but that's what we're trying to do now.
Right. So I think a workaround is probably not the best solution. I mean, let's figure out a strong solution, which may be difficult, but let's try and figure it out.
Yes, but in the meantime, I think it's okay to have a solution that people can implement, deploy for non-HTTPS, for HTTP basically. And let's take time and work out a solution for HTTPS, yes.
Yeah, as long as the end users don't get upset. They should not see red screens.
So Frederick, you've had a lot of comments. Do you feel that you are on top of them, and is your plan to address them? And
yes, I think we can we can do that. Thank you.
All right. So that brings us to the end of the agenda. Yes,
before you add that,
Mr.
Kent Leung. So actually, I realized that the MPEG dash, you had a note in it. So I want to make sure that was brought up as far as what's the status on that.
Yeah, so let me say a little bit about it, and maybe you guys can help me and complete. So for everyone's benefit, so the story is that we we exchanged liaison with MPEG- about URI signing for segmented content, right? We received the liaison sometime before Prague. We had taken an action item to respond to that liaison, and we didn't actually follow through, okay? And they've just reissued another liaison statement that was received yesterday, I think, that relates to URI signing for segmented content. So we have this liaison statement from MPEG. I mean, do any of you want to comment on the content of the liaison and what's been said on the list on it? Because I didn't follow the discussion. Do you want to, Kent?
I don't know if I want to, but I'll just say something quick about it. I mean, from what I gleaned from it, was about them recommending use of token, and I think Ben actually responded to that email. So I think we need to read more in detail what they're asking for. I had a little bit higher level question on that too, in the sense of based on what happened since we've taken kind of the has part out of URI signing, right? So and before getting the nitty of what they want, out of it, what is our, I guess, plan going forth? Is I guess Ray's draft will be the one that will satisfy their needs, or I guess I'm just trying to understand too.
Right. So I mean, you're right that one thing, assuming we do respond to that liaison, I think the number one thing we should say is that our working group document no longer works on URI signing for adaptive content, segmented content, and probably we should explain that this is because of the IPR issue. So I think that's a number one thing we need to tell them right now. Now, to your other question, what's going to happen with the other document? We don't have explicitly in the charter for now to solve all the problems related to adaptive streaming. We haven't solved them for the other documents. So it was a bit of a stretch to try to solve it for URI signing. We thought we could do it relatively simply. We said, let's do it. It's not that simple. We said, remove it. So to me, it's not obvious that we need to have a working group solution and that the charter requires that right now. So my suggestion is that, at least for now, it's good to continue to progress the Ray's document if he's willing to put a bit more effort into that. I think the working group has decided that we don't want to have that become a working group item. So I don't see a reason to revert that decision. So I think the only other option would be for Ray to progress it as an individual's document. Okay, that's one option. That's sort of up to Ray to decide. One thing I will add is that I did ask Ray whether he thought that he could change his document so that something different is done, which is not subject to the IPR. And I think the short answer is that that doesn't seem to be possible. So that avenue doesn't exist. So the short story is, with respect to what happened, is I think it's probably up to Ray to decide whether he wants to progress that as an individual document.
Kevin Ma, I haven't gone through this carefully yet, but I was wondering if anyone had any thoughts on how much closer bringing back the path match gets us to this. Obviously, we don't get the header-based. Is that all, or I don't know? We should probably evaluate whether or not path match gets us most of the way there, and whether or not that's good enough for them or not.
Yeah, so I guess my thought on this is that, we have a very, hopefully the scoping the path match to what we're trying to accomplish. I think it's a simple way of getting that function capability in, right? I would think that was the primary goal, so that way we can move forth, right? And then we can evaluate if that matches what MPEG- is asking for as a secondary, because I don't want to end up linking back, but I think it's worthwhile to understand it because it does require people to actually study exactly what they're doing for adaptive bit streaming, right? So, I mean, that's my thought that comes right out. But
so let me check I understand that correctly. I think you're saying, Kevin, that, well, and you're agreeing, Ken, that, you know, because we're adding stuff into the working group document that you are assigning for the handling of path match.
Yeah.
That provides some of the support for signing for adaptive content.
Correct.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's a good point. Will the document actually say that much, that this path match, you know, can be used for adaptive content?
I don't think that's the original plan to do that because that would require evaluation of that, right? I mean, and I guess my things as far as priority and focus is trying to get this part done, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the main thing, right?
Yeah.
And this is secondary, which is that let's go back, evaluate. And if there's it's just like last time, right? If there's a minor delta, everybody agree to it, we add that and we're done, right? Instead of spending a lot of time going through this adaptive bit rate, right? Which I feel like it's more than it always ends up being.
Right.
And then we're gonna slow things down again and we're gonna circle back and with the IPR and a bunch of stuff. So I'm trying to avoid that because it seems like what we're going down track is non-IPR-ish, clearly, right? So I don't want to muddle it again. Just my thoughts.
Yeah, I think we should focus on the plan of record for getting the new stuff into the document, to the working group document. Just with respect to the liaison statement, they can evaluate the revved version of it, and you know they can comment. Obviously, they probably will, but
yeah.
Yeah, but we as chairs, you know, should get an action item to respond to the liaison statement. You know, again, clarify that the working document. I shouldn't say doesn't support segmented content, but has limited support of segmented content. And you know, ideally respond in more detail to their specific requirements. Okay. All right, so I think this time we're done with the agenda. You know, there's no specific conclusion I want to add. So anything you want to add, Kevin? Okay, well, welcome as a chair.
thank you.
So goodbye, everyone. Thank you very much, and keep working on the list, and we'll see you in Buenos Aires. Yes, we'll try to get the other one as well. Anyone knows where the other blue sheet is? I can ask you. Thank you.
Just talk to him in French. Mais si, ça va nous mettre à égalité. Should we go outside or? Yeah.
All right, gentlemen.
Last time.
It's been fun. It's been real. Just hasn't been real fun.
Well said.
What's new for you then? No. I'll get my keys signed.